I never thought that coming back home from a short trip would feel like stepping into some kind of twisted movie, but that's exactly what happened. I had been gone for only 5 days, visiting my sister out of state, and I came back a day earlier than anyone expected. The drive back was calm, the road stretched long and quiet, and all I could think about was pulling into my ranch, feeding the horses myself, and getting a good night's sleep in my own bed. But when I finally turned down the long dirt driveway that leads to my property, I immediately knew something was wrong. The sound of voices carried through the air, too many voices for what should have been a quiet evening at my ranch. At first, I thought maybe one of my neighbors had dropped by to check on things and had brought along a couple of friends for a barbecue, but the closer I got, the more it sounded like a crowd. I parked my truck and stepped out, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Off to the left, near my barn, there were tents set up, long folding tables with drinks, chairs lined up in neat little rows like an audience, and people holding what looked like numbered paddles. It looked like a county fairground, but it was happening on my ranch. I walked forward, trying to make sense of it, and then I saw her, Karen. She was standing tall on a makeshift wooden stage, holding a microphone, her sunglasses perched proudly on her head, and she was speaking into the crowd with the confidence of an auctioneer. "Do I hear 200,000? 200. Going once, going twice," she shouted, her voice carrying across the land. And people were actually raising their paddles, some laughing, some whispering, as if this was a real, legitimate auction. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around at what she was pointing to, my ranch. My land. My barn. My cattle. Even my tractor parked by the shed. She was standing there trying to sell my entire life like it was some yard sale find. For a moment, I just stood frozen, my brain refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. Then rage boiled up inside me. I slammed the door of my truck so hard that the sound echoed across the property and every head in the crowd turned toward me. The murmuring started, people shifting uncomfortably, and Karen's painted smile faltered when she saw me. But instead of stopping, instead of even acknowledging that she'd been caught, she waved her hand dramatically at the crowd and said, "Oh look, the former owner decided to show up." Former owner? My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Former owner? That was my land, handed down through generations, the pride of my family, the place I had spent my blood and sweat maintaining. I marched right up toward that stage, my boots kicking up dust, and people stepped aside like I was some storm blowing through. When I reached the front, I glared up at her. "What in the world is going on here?" I shouted, my voice louder than I'd ever heard it. The crowd went silent for a split second, all eyes flicking between me and Karen. She adjusted her sunglasses on her head like she was the queen of the world and leaned toward the microphone. "What's going on," she said with a smirk, "is that the HOA has taken control of this property due to unpaid community fees. As president, I am authorized to liquidate it." I couldn't help it, I laughed, a bitter, angry laugh that startled a few people. "Fees? Community fees? I don't even belong to your HOA. This ranch has been here 50 years, long before you moved into this county with your clipboards and rules. This is private land." Karen tilted her head like I was a child who didn't understand basic math. "Oh, don't worry. You were added automatically when you failed to register at our meetings. And I'm afraid, sir, that your barn color, your fencing, and even your livestock enclosures are in violation of several community codes. So yes, the HOA had no choice but to seize this property." The smugness dripping from her words made my fists clench. I looked around at the crowd, noticing the confusion settling over their faces. Some were muttering, clearly realizing this didn't sound right. A man in the back whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Wait, can they even do that? Is this legal?" I stepped forward, pulling myself tall, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "No, it's not legal. This is my ranch. I have the deed, the paperwork, the proof of ownership right in my truck. This is nothing but a scam." Karen's smile flickered for the first time, but she quickly doubled down. Ignore him, folks. He's just upset he couldn't pay his dues. We'll proceed with the auction. She raised her hand again and called out, 300,000 for the barn and equipment. Who's got 300? I couldn't believe it. She was actually trying to push through, pretending as if I was some stranger. My blood boiled hotter, but before I could yell again, someone in the crowd shouted, "Hold on. If this man owns the property, then what's going on here?" The tension thickened in the air, and Karen's face twisted. Then, with dramatic flair, she pulled her phone from her pocket, put it to her ear, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Yes, 911? I'd like to report a trespasser. He's violent, unstable, and refusing to leave HOA property." The crowd gasped. I just stood there in disbelief, staring at her as she blatantly lied into the phone, pointing at me like I was some criminal. My heart pounded harder, not with fear but with fury. This wasn't just arrogance anymore, this was an organized attempt to take my home away from me. And Karen, with her smug grin and fake authority, had no idea she had just made the worst mistake of her life. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, people shifting in their seats, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Some of them still clutched those paddles like they weren't sure whether this was an actual auction or a scam unraveling right in front of their eyes. I could see the uncertainty in their expressions, some embarrassed that they might have been tricked, others irritated that their Saturday afternoon had been wasted. But the one person who didn't look uncertain was Karen. She stood tall on that little stage she had built, her chest puffed out, her sunglasses reflecting the sunlight, her smug face screaming one thing, control. She really thought she owned the place, and in that moment, she wanted everyone to believe I was the outsider here. I clenched my fists, taking a few deep breaths, because if I let my temper go, this would escalate into something worse than it already was. I stepped closer, my voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the noise. This is my property. I don't care what lies you've told these folks. I have legal proof in my truck. You have nothing but your own arrogance. Karen leaned into her microphone, smiling like a snake. Sir, this isn't arrogance. This is law. You've been in violation of HOA codes for months. You didn't pay dues, you didn't attend meetings, and worst of all, you painted your barn an unapproved color. The crowd laughed nervously at that. Some shook their heads like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. I raised an eyebrow. Unapproved color? Lady, my barn has been red since before you were born. My grandfather painted it with his own 2 hands, and no HOA was around to complain back then. Karen's smirk widened. Well, times change. Communities grow. Rules are necessary to keep order. She turned toward the crowd, spreading her arms wide like she was addressing loyal subjects. This property, while once charming, is an eyesore compared to the neat and orderly standards of our community. That is why the HOA acted, why we seized this property, and why it is now being liquidated. That was the moment the crowd's confusion began turning to suspicion. A woman in the second row raised her hand timidly, like she was in a classroom. Excuse me, but can the HOA even do that? I thought they only handled landscaping rules and pool hours, not, you know, people's actual land. Karen's eyes narrowed. She didn't like being questioned, especially not in front of her little audience. The sirens grew louder until the flashing red and blue lights cut through the late afternoon sun. 2 patrol cars rumbled up my driveway, gravel crunching under their tires, and the crowd shifted nervously like a wave about to break. Some people were already backing away, clearly wanting no part in what was happening now. Others leaned forward with curiosity, as though this was some kind of live show. And then there was Karen, standing proudly on that little wooden stage she'd built, microphone in one hand, the other hand raised like she was welcoming her reinforcements. She looked down at me with that smug grin and whispered into the mic just loud enough for people to hear, "This is where you leave in handcuffs. The deputies stepped out of their vehicles, calm and steady, scanning the scene. One of them, a tall man with a square jaw and mirrored sunglasses, adjusted his belt and walked toward Karen first. The second deputy hung back, observing the crowd, his eyes flicking toward me, then to the documents I still held in my hand. Karen wasted no time. She practically leapt off her stage and rushed toward the deputies, waving her arms in exaggerated motions like she was flagging down a rescue helicopter. "Officers! Thank goodness you're here. That man right there," she jabbed her finger toward me, "is trespassing. He broke onto HOA property, he's disrupting a legal auction, and he's violent and unstable. He threatened me and everyone here." The crowd murmured again, some rolling their eyes, others whispering. The deputies stayed calm, not moving too quickly, not reaching for their weapons, just listening. The first deputy held up his hand to quiet Karen down. "All right, ma'am, slow down. We'll sort this out. Do you have any proof of ownership or documentation showing this is HOA property?" Karen's lips curled into a victorious smile. "Of course I do." She pulled out the same thin folder she'd flashed earlier and handed it over with a flourish. "All the paperwork is here. The HOA rules, the seizure order, everything." The deputy opened the folder, flipping through the pages, his expression unreadable behind those sunglasses. He paused, flipped again, then raised one eyebrow ever so slightly. "Ma'am, these aren't legal property documents. This is a newsletter. And this," he held up one sheet, "looks like a printout from a website template. None of this is a deed. None of this is a court order." The crowd laughed nervously, a few people muttering, "I knew it," and "unbelievable." Karen's smile faltered, but she quickly tried to cover it up. "And no, those are the updated forms. The official forms are at the HOA office. We didn't have time to bring them, but trust me, it's all valid." That's when the second deputy, the quieter one, walked over to me. "Sir, do you have documentation showing you're the owner of this property?" Without hesitation, I handed him my thick folder. He opened it, flipped through the pages carefully, and nodded. "This looks official. Deed, tax receipts, county seal, notarized signatures. This matches the property description exactly." The first deputy handed Karen back her fake papers and looked at her sternly. "Ma'am, nothing you've shown us here gives you the right to auction off this ranch. The deed clearly belongs to him. Unless you can produce real, court-issued documents, this auction is not only invalid, it looks like attempted fraud." Karen's face twisted with panic, her eyes darting to the crowd who were now openly staring at her like she was a criminal. She stomped her foot like a child throwing a tantrum. "No. You don't understand. He owes us money. He ignored the HOA. He painted his barn without permission." The deputy cut her off. "Ma'am, even if all that were true, and I'm not saying it is, you still wouldn't have the authority to seize or sell private property. Only the courts can issue those orders, not an HOA, and certainly not you." The crowd gasped again, louder this time. A man shouted from the back, "I gave her a deposit. She said this was legal." Another voice chimed in, "Yeah, me too. Where's my money?" People started standing, pointing at Karen, their confusion now turning into anger. They had come here thinking they were getting a deal, and instead they realized they had been duped. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to hold her ground. No, you don't understand, I was just enforcing community rules. I was trying to protect everyone's property values." The second deputy closed my folder, handed it back to me, and looked her straight in the eye. "Ma'am, what you were trying to do was steal. You set up a fake auction, collected money under false pretenses, and then you called 911 to file a false report against the rightful owner. That's not protecting property values. That's a crime." The air was electric. The crowd erupted into murmurs and angry shouts. Some people demanded refunds, others cursed her under their breath. Karen's face went from red to pale, her body stiff like she was cornered. She tried to backpedal, holding her hands up. Wait, maybe this was just a misunderstanding. We can talk about this, can't we? Officers, I'm the president of the HOA, I deserve some respect. The first deputy actually chuckled. Ma'am, you can call yourself the president, the queen, or the sheriff of Mars for all I care. Doesn't change the law. And the law says you don't have the right to do what you did here today. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She glanced at the crowd, hoping someone might back her up, but all she saw were angry faces. The same people who had once sat listening to her were now glaring, muttering about pressing charges, demanding their money back, and shaking their heads in disbelief. The deputies stepped closer, their calm authority pressing down harder than any yelling ever could. The first one spoke firmly. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. You're under investigation for attempted fraud, impersonation of authority, and filing a false 911 report. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. The crowd collectively gasped as the words hit them. People pulled out their phones, recording what was about to happen. Karen's composure shattered completely. She shook her head violently. No, you can't do this to me. I'm the HOA president. I run this community. The deputy shook his head. Not anymore, ma'am. He gently but firmly grabbed her wrists, pulling them behind her back as the other deputy pulled out the cuffs. The click of the metal locking echoed in the silence, followed by the roar of cheers and clapping from the crowd. Karen screamed, kicking her feet like a spoiled child. You'll regret this. All of you. You can't treat me like this. But her voice was drowned out by the applause and laughter of the very people she had tried to fool. I stood there, clutching my folder, watching as they walked her toward the patrol car. For the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe again. This was my land, my family's ranch, and no self-proclaimed HOA president was going to take it away from me. As they pushed Karen into the back of the squad car, the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with disbelief. Some people came up to me, shaking my hand, apologizing for being tricked. Others muttered angrily about pressing charges of their own, swearing they'd never trust her again. I nodded, thanked them, and told them the truth, that sometimes bullies like Karen hide behind fake authority, but the law always catches up to them. And in that moment, as the patrol cars pulled away with Karen inside, I knew the fight was over, but the story wasn't finished yet. The squad cars disappeared down the dusty road, their flashing lights fading into the distance, leaving behind a crowd that still couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Some people lingered, staring at the stage Karen had built, the rows of chairs, and the auction paddles lying abandoned on the ground. Others walked up to me, one by one, shaking their heads and offering words of apology. Sorry, man, I didn't know, one said, still clutching a check he had written for a deposit. She made it sound so official. Another man, older with a gray beard, muttered, I should have trusted my gut. I knew HOAs could be a pain, but I never thought one would go this far. I reassured them the best I could. Don't blame yourselves. She's been planning this for a while, and she knew how to make it look convincing. What matters is you all saw the truth today. She's not going to get away with it. Some nodded, some sighed, and eventually, the crowd thinned until I was left standing on my land with only a few neighbors lingering at the edge of the driveway. My ranch was quiet again, the way it was supposed to be, except for the folding chairs, the trash, and the faint smell of Karen's perfume still lingering on the stage she'd dragged onto my property. I walked slowly across the yard, my boots crunching over gravel and dirt, and I stopped by the barn. I ran my hand along the weathered wood, the same boards my grandfather had nailed in place decades ago, painted with his own two hands. That barn had stood through storms, droughts, and years of hard work, and yet somehow it had almost been stolen by a woman with nothing but a fake title and a stack of lies. The thought made me clench my fists again, not out of fresh anger, but out of determination. This wasn't going to happen again. Not here. Not to me. Not ever. That night, after the sun dipped below the hills and the stars filled the sky, I sat on my porch with a strong cup of coffee, staring out at the fields. The cattle moved slowly in the distance, the crickets chirped, and the wind carried that familiar ranch smell, earth, hay, and freedom. But I couldn't shake the image of Karen standing on that stage, waving her arms like she had every right to own what she didn't build. The way she had so easily convinced others made me realize just how close I came to losing everything. If I hadn't returned a day early, she might have tricked people into handing over real money, maybe even dragged me into a long court battle, all built on lies. So I made a decision right there on that porch. Tomorrow wasn't going to be business as usual. Tomorrow, I was going to lock this place down tighter than a bank vault. And that's exactly what I did. The next morning, I drove into town and bought new locks, heavy-duty chains, and state-of-the-art cameras. I installed motion sensors at the gates, cameras on the barns, and spotlights that lit up half the ranch when triggered. I put up new, private property, signs, bold enough for even the most arrogant HOA president to read. My gates were reinforced, my fences double-checked, and I made sure my paperwork was scanned, copied, and stored in 3 different places. If anyone ever tried to claim this ranch again, I'd have everything ready in seconds. Word spread quickly in the community. The story of Karen's fake auction became the kind of tale people told at barbecues and church gatherings. "Did you hear about what she tried to pull on the ranch?" became a question whispered in grocery store aisles. Some laughed about it, some shook their heads, and some admitted they had once trusted her, only to see her true colors exposed. The HOA itself wasn't happy either. I started receiving letters in the mail, full of official-sounding words but empty of actual authority. They threatened fines, legal action, and even liens, but none of it held water. Each time, I took the letter straight to my lawyer, who sent them right back with a reminder that my land was never under their jurisdiction. The HOA's threats eventually fizzled, and without Karen's loud voice leading the charge, they didn't have the backbone to push it any further. As for Karen, the deputies told me she was facing a laundry list of charges: fraud, impersonation, filing a false report, and who knows what else. I heard she tried to talk her way out of it, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the recordings from the crowd and the official reports from the deputies told a different story. The last I heard, she was banned from holding any position in the HOA and was looking at serious fines, maybe even jail time. It was fitting. For years she had strutted around the community acting like a queen, and now she was nothing more than a cautionary tale. Life slowly returned to normal after that, but it wasn't quite the same. My ranch felt different, not weaker, but stronger, because it had been tested. I had been tested. And I learned something valuable in the process. People like Karen thrive on intimidation and false authority. They dress their lies up with fancy titles and fake documents, but at the end of the day, the truth and the law are stronger. You just have to stand your ground. Sometimes at night, I sit on that porch and think about how things could have gone if I hadn't shown up when I did. If I had come back just one day later, maybe she would have convinced someone to pay a huge sum, maybe even tried to kick me off my own land by force. That thought chills me, but it also fuels me. It reminds me that you can't take anything for granted, not your home, not your rights, not your freedom. I also think about the crowd, the way their faces shifted from trust to suspicion to anger. They were victims too, and in a way, they taught me something important. Even when you're surrounded by lies, people eventually see the truth if you stand firm enough. Some of those same folks who once sat clapping at her auction now wave at me when they pass the ranch, tipping their hats, sometimes stopping to say, "Glad you stood up to her. Glad you fought back." And every time I hear that, I smile. Because the truth is, this wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about one ranch. It was about showing that bullies like Karen don't win when they're exposed. They lose, and they lose big. So if there's one lesson to take from this story, it's this: don't let anyone, HOA, neighbor, or self-proclaimed president, convince you that you don't have the right to stand on your own land. Don't let anyone's fake authority make you doubt what's rightfully yours. Because when the day comes that they push too far, you'll be ready, and when the law shows up, the truth will always win. And as for me, well, I'm still here. The ranch is still mine. And Karen? She learned the hard way that you can't auction off something that was never yours to begin with.